this video, I want to focus specifically on how we think we are seen by others. We're exploring various perplexities that surround the term seeing and how we might approach that. But when it comes to being seen by others, some novel considerations arise. We're going to pay particular attention to faces and to mirrors. We've noted in a previous video before that the imagistic theory of vision, as it has been contracted in a particular form, has a remarkable habit of presenting people with images of faces close by on a screen, right in front of them. A situation very unlike being that close to a real face. Now, we noted before that being in the presence of a tiger is not the same thing as looking at an image of a tiger, and that the same is true for faces. And yet a vast amount of experimentation, modeling, theorizing has gone on based on placing human subjects in a seated position at a fixed distance from a screen and displaying images of faces. Why this concern with faces? We noted also that there seems to be a confusion in our language as to having to do with presence and immanence. We noted that in Zoom we are actually face-to-face, whereas when we're face-to-face in a classroom we are by no means face-to-face. It would be most rude to stand with your face about this far away from somebody, whereas on Zoom our faces are nicely contained within boxes and everyone has one. Now, telling a history of the face would be impossible because there's no neutral point of view. Faces play a huge role in social intercourse in every society. And faces are typically modified or sculpted or preened in accordance with whatever the conventions of the time are. People today spend an awful lot of time designing little avatars for their face for use on their social media posts. And makeup is an extraordinary wonderland of face alteration. That's where we are now, but it's not the case that faces suddenly became important in, let's say, the birth of scientific modernity. Faces feature in social interaction in every human society, but the manner in which they do is always somewhat culturally specific. There are changes. The introduction of dentistry, for example, changed faces and changed how people wanted to appear to others. Introduction of spectacles may have done something similar. Certainly the preponderance of selfies today makes the face more important than ever. Which leads us back to a peculiar situation, which is that nobody's ever seen their own face. Now, this is not a joke. This is a fact. Once we can learn to distinguish images from the real thing, like an image of a tiger from a tiger, nobody has ever seen their own face. Take, for example, this famous drawing done by Ernst Mach of what you might call a first-person perspective, but I hope we're learning to be cautious now with the use of the static monocular viewpoint, which this could be taken as, and realize that in this self-portrait he attempted to draw, as it were, the visual field from a static position, lying down. And he tried to include some of his own head, a little bit that he could see. And it's all a little tortuous. Perhaps a better way of thinking of it is this. I think I might have mentioned in a previous video that for some people, the recognition that you've never seen your own face is quite emancipatory. And it leads to regarding seeing somewhat differently. Douglas Harding is the gentleman in question who made a big deal out of this. Your position is you can see your body as part of the world, and as you point to your body, you can point up to about here, and then there's just the world. There's no discontinuity. This perplexing situation is glossed over because for some reason, we're not aware of this a lot of the time. We're very aware that we have a face. And I'd like to consider perhaps the most iconic picture of the face that has influenced at least European thought. The example given here is just one oil painting of a mythical encounter of the veil of Veronica, a towel basically, applied with the hands to Christ's face as he was climbing up Calvary. This became enshrined as the sixth station of the cross and has been reproduced in very, very many forms. It plays a central role in Christian imagination because it was formed by direct contact with the face, direct contact between the hand and the face. And this has become, as it were, an archetype for the face within Christian kind of societies. It's the face of the suffering individual. It's singular, human, and very personal. Now, of course, Christianity is a strange word to invoke here, and I use it only to recognize the broader cultural cauldron in which science grew up. Today, in a techno-scientific world, we find such strange things as this, which bills itself as an attempt to create an average face by taking many images of faces and averaging them. Now, of course, this is something of a farce, because the selection that goes into choosing those faces determines the archetype that will emerge. There is no underlying archetype emerging here. This is a clear case of the biases of those who select the pictures are bringing forth something that they recognize as a kind of an archetypical face. So if this is an archetype of a face of someone in contemporary secular society, let's just consider how faces might appear elsewhere. This is a Maori face, and it doesn't invite the same kind of attitude towards the other as the Christ face does. These are the faces of three Indian gods, Jagannath, Balabhadra, and Subhadra. They're beautiful, and they're also kind of wacky, and they have these big old eyes. They have faces, but they're not human faces. They're also not threatening faces. They are not you. They are distinct from you. But you do encounter an other. Through the paired dots of the eyes, you still encounter another. The equation of Christ's face with the face of the individual is hard to see if you're in a European society, but it might be more obvious if you go elsewhere. In India, for example, Kali is not a Christ figure. And the relationship of Kali, the goddess, to the face is not one that you would want to put your hands anywhere near. Now, I've adduced these examples just to make us perhaps momentarily aware of the construction of the face within a particular social, historical, cultural context. But what we're tracing in these videos is the manner in which our seeing has been influenced by technological developments, cultural developments, practices, and habits that belong to history and culture, but that do not inhere in the geometry of light. The geometry of light is the one thing to which all theories of seeing must be beholden, of course. And we followed the role of linear perspective, photography, the static monocular viewing point. But inside these boxed houses that we've built with their rectangular walls, we regularly place mirrors. And mirrors, every time you look in a mirror, you get a reassurance of your position within a box-like scheme of things. You see something which resembles the space you're in, except it loses that first-person perspective. That is, you have a head in the mirror, which you don't have in the real world. So a mirror is in no sense just a doubling of your situation. It's a transformation and a representation. Mirrors greatly affect us then. They're also the principal means by which we meet our face. But that's probably historical. Mirrors have been around for a long, long time. These days, we're just as likely to use our mobile phone to figure out where we are through Google Maps, constant indices that tell us where we are, what the timestamp is. And so we've moved perhaps from the middle of the 20th century, we moved from what Foucault and Deleuze have called disciplinary societies in which people were expected to be located in particular positions like the factory or the prison or the workhouse or the hospital, to societies of control, in which the behavioral nudges and constraints that organize our being are vastly distributed. And we do this to ourselves. We've got the cameras in the phones now, and we use them. All of this makes us liable to forget that a mirror is an artifact created to produce a particular effect. The fact that the mirror works so well hides the artifice. The construction of perspectival views, is actually a lot of work. And mirrors don't necessarily give you something which is akin to a snapshot. Mirrors can produce all kinds of things, as in this figure from the famous Bruce Lee film. When we look in a mirror, then, what we see is not simply what's there. We make sense of what we see, and we do so in ways that are not unconditioned. There is no innocent eye with which to behold anything in this world. Every seeing subject sees and makes sense of the world with their full capacity for understanding, which means that they are not merely registering or recording something which is there. We see this perhaps with force as we consider the perplexing situation of the anorexic in front of a mirror, to whom the view in the mirror does not produce the effect that we would demand or expect it to have. There is no such thing as the innocent eye. This was a claim made by the art historian Ernst Gombrich, when he pointed out that you cannot understand seeing unless you understand patternings, habits, technology, conventions that have arisen and accumulated over time. We are all educated seers, which gives rise to this wonderful painting, The Innocent Eye Test by Mark Tansey. And I'm going to point out the paradoxical nature of the situation you find yourself in right now. You're sitting staring at a screen. On the screen is an image. In the image, a bunch of men and a bunch of cows seem to be assembled before another image. In that image, there is a landscape painting including a cow. The gentleman in the first image seemed to be asking of the cow whether it can recognize itself in the painted surface. This very amusing situation is full of paradox, but it's worth reminding ourselves that to some researchers it has seemed sensible to ask of animals whether they recognize themselves in a mirror. A standard test for what some people assert as self-consciousness is to place a blue dot or something on the forehead of an animal, if it has a forehead, while it's sleeping, and then introduce a mirror into its cage, usually cage, and then notice, does it recognize that the blue dot it sees in the mirror has a counterpart in the non-reflected world. People have done this with apes and dolphins and God knows what. And the whole premise of this particular test is resting on the mistaken assumption that we simply see what's there without any education, cultural bias, mediation, convention, and so on. So in considering not only seeing, but how we think we are seen by others, the distributed system of observation that we have now in place through mirrors, cameras, and so on, forms part of what is a very complex picture. I'm going to do a final video in this series now, in which we'll turn to rather more general matters, the notion of time, and maybe say some concluding remarks.